So we have Niall Haggart from Daniels Corporation and Pina Petricone from Giannone Petricone Architects. They're collaborating at least on one project, or more than one.
Nope, just one.
One?
But it's a really big one.
Okay, so one big collaboration, and we're going to hear about
Great,
it.
Hans, thank you very much. Everybody hear me all right? My name is Niall Haggart. I'm Executive Vice President of Daniels Corporation. Just a little bit of background about who we are. We are a home building company, land development company that is based here in the Greater Toronto area. We build about 1,000 homes a year, so we're fairly significant in terms of providing to Toronto's housing stock, and that's why I love sort of speaking at events like this. We are completely vertically integrated in terms of our ability to acquire land, take it through that complicated rezoning process, and we actually are unique insofar as both high-rise and low-rise building divisions. So I think it's just so interesting to talk about housing and the different typologies and the different built form, that can be realized. We also do everything from entry level through to seniors housing, through to rental housing as well. So the whole cradle to grave and kind of everything in between, if you will. A couple of background shots. I mean, some of you may know us as a couple of prominent buildings. The one I'm showing right now is TIFF Bell Lightbox, the home for the Toronto International Film Festival, a really spectacular building designed by Bruce Kobara. Very interesting insofar as shifting the whole cultural aspect of film down to the entertainment district. Up until sort of today, if you will, the project that Pina and I are going to talk about, I would have characterized this as the mother of all mixed-use buildings. Lots going on in this building. The podium expression, 175,000 square feet. Home for the film festival, 5 dedicated theaters, private theater screening, administrative space, a film archive library, restaurants, retail, all sorts of public animation. It's a building that truly reaches out to the community, and of course the residential component above. And another significant community that you would likely know us for is the private sector partner helping to revitalize Regent Park. And Regent Park, a very prominent land use, 70 acres, Toronto's East End. We've chosen to identify Daniels Spectrum, a 60,000 square foot arts-based facility that is within the second phase of Regent Park. And it has been just an incredible experience and a privilege for us to partner with Toronto Community Housing to help revitalize that area and really be creative about how we approach housing and the different typologies and what we call the financial, or the kind of financial toolbox that we can collectively access to try and create affordable housing in a bunch of different ways, shapes, and forms. But we're not here to talk about this today. We're here to talk about a very unique community that is actually under construction today. And we call it Daniels Waterfront City of the Arts. So I think, as Peter had mentioned earlier, we are adept and desirous of wanting to form relationships with Toronto's arts community, and that arts community can span a broad spectrum. And as evidenced by TIFF Bell Lightbox being sort of the film aspect, Daniels Spectrum, which I talked about, has a whole host of different arts and cultural organizations, a Center for Social Innovation. It's managed by Toronto's Artscape, which those of you who know Artscape is the City of Toronto's arts provider, an amazing organization. And so just to fast forward, we've done a number of significant communities in Toronto. The area I'm talking about today, and in the laser pointer, I'll talk about it sort of here, is characterized as the East Bayfront lands. I'm showing you clearly the precinct plan for this area. A very prominent area governed by not only the City of Toronto, but Waterfront Toronto, which has been a product of all levels of government that came into place a number of years ago to consolidate land ownership. A lot of this is informal industrial land. There were significant soils and contamination issues. Waterfront Toronto was charged with revitalizing the waterfront. And I think they've done an incredible job in terms of master planning, public engagement, the amenity spaces they've created. This was all on every single developer's radar, this work. And we were fortuitous enough to put our hands on 2 blocks, if you will, which are, you can see up here in the corner. A city block approximately 2.8 acres in size. To the north, it's Lakeshore Boulevard. To the south, Queens Quay. Lower Jarvis to the west, and Richardson, a minor collector street. And as you can see, it's a gateway to the East Bayfront community. And that's what was really, really interesting. So some of the younger audience members may know this as this was the former house of the government, the nightclub. And so we were the people that took down the government. You know, what can I say? My kids were not thrilled, but you know. And it was interesting because you know, the city of Toronto adopted a zoning bylaw. So a lot of land consolidation, the creation of Waterfront Toronto. The city of Toronto comes in and created a zoning bylaw on the precinct plan in and around 2006. And that seemingly overnight granted, you know, what you see here today, save and except for our parcel. You can see it actually on this slide over here. This was Waterfront Toronto's sort of vision of the precinct plan. I mean, pretty cool and nifty stuff, but you know, what do Waterfront Toronto know about developing and about, you know, marketing units and selling and talking about you know, marketable density and different uses and you know, so not surprisingly, everybody was upset. You know, some people thought the location of some of the buildings were improperly sited up against the Gardiner Expressway, a very difficult sort of area to be able to sell. You know, some of the landowners, again, not surprisingly, were very concerned about not enough density. Go figure. Overnight they get all this windfall, but you know, and so everybody appealed this to the board. And so fast forward to around 2011 is when we sort of took a real critical look and were able to acquire both these parcels of land. And so we stepped into, you know, what I would characterize as a proverbial hornet's nest in terms of every single OMB lawyer, you know, being paid a lot of money, multiple fights at the board, lots of interesting dynamic going on, and you know, it seemed like the lawyers were getting enriched, and you know, somebody needed to take a position to be able to kind of go and try and get something landed here. Now, I should clarify that a couple of interesting notes over here, Mond. So those are our friends at Great Gulf. Great Gulf actually had land use approvals, and the reason they had them was because they did a purchase from Waterfront Toronto. In that case, Waterfront was a vendor. Ours was the first private sector acquisition, and that makes it notably different. Private sector purchase, where we then step into the position of these people, you know, who are clearly at the board, and you know, if I can sort of distill it down to three components, and I don't know if I have this on the next slide. Yeah, so we'll bring it in. Did I somehow flip this up? Oh, see, I figured that out. Okay, thank you. All right, so this slide here. So in the pink is our piece of land. So again, as Peter alluded to in his presentation on the work he's done with Pier 27, which is just sort of on just over here, this side. Redpath, a very significant 50-plus year industrial landowner, existing operation, no intention to go anywhere. Go figure the business economics of you know, tanker trucks coming up through the St. Lawrence and coming in to unload cargo here. So it's a historical operation, but they have no intention, and you know, very, very significant footprint, if you will, and a whole bunch of characterized as compatibility concerns. So Redpath was taking everybody you know, to the board. I don't need to tell you sorry, I keep doing this. I don't need to tell you, obviously, the impact and how close they are well, how close our site is to them. So they were a significant player in this whole dialogue. Obviously, Waterfront Toronto were significant players, and the City of Toronto were very significant players. So to cut a very long story short, it took us probably about 2 years to be able to negotiate, 2.5 years, you know, with all the different stakeholders. I think just a notable issue was it had been traveling and had gone to Cape Town, South Africa, and was absolutely awestruck about their waterfront and how dynamic that waterfront is and all the different uses that seemingly cohabitate in that waterfront, and you know, where you have high-end hotel where my daughter and I are actually staying. Beautiful nightlife, restaurants, retail, residential, and not a minute walk from this hotel, there's a dry dock. And here's a massive tanker and, getting sandblasted. I mean, I won't speak to all the MOE criteria around that, but how fascinating from a pedestrian perspective to be able to go and see all these things happening. And so, we came back and it just struck me, and our company has always had a desire of wanting to speak for ourselves. We don't necessarily do a lot of speaking through lawyers and planners and other experts. We have a really good sense about what we want to do, and we can sit with somebody and say, here is what we want to do, here's why we think it's a very good idea, what are the concerns, let's get into a dialogue, and that's really what it's about. So the best big move we made was me picking up the telephone and phoning the president of Redpath and saying, we seemingly are doing a lot of discussion without us talking face to face, let's get together. And so that was the start of a very productive dialogue, and in the end of the day, Jonathan and I sat down, we figured out how to alleviate concerns as it relates to impacts with noise and odor, and I won't get into all the complications, and believe me, I'm not an engineer. I mean, I needed to understand a certain amount of the parameters, but Jonathan and I were two businessmen wanting to figure out, can we make something work here? And so we sat, late one evening, and we actually did a 2.5-page letter of agreement that served as the genesis for our settlement agreement, which then the lawyers promptly turned into 110 plus pages, as lawyers are apt to do. But that was really, one of the big moves. And then the other sort of big move, if you will, was a very ambitious mixed-use community that we wanted to create on the waterfront. And so lots of discussion with Waterfront Toronto and the City of Toronto about the type of community and about the type of uses that we wanted to create. So, just in no particular order, because of the relationship between our site and Redpath, they were very concerned in particular about this building right here, and that become what I would call a buffer building. And so that buffer building was to not have any residential uses. Residential under MOE criteria are classified as sensitive, and so that was a real bone of contention, and I quickly realized this is a significant showstopper. So we made that commitment, and it set up a whole dynamic about how we're going to realize the vision for this space. So today we have we got approval to a zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw is approximately 1.4 million square feet of buildable over 2.8 acres. So it's an ambitious community characterized by the 2 blocks. Pina and I are really going to focus on the north block. The south block at this today is entirely non-residential uses. I mean, so we took a buffer building. We, being Daniels, is primarily a residential developer, although we have a lot of mixed-use experience, rapidly learned how to do more significant non-residential. So we are doing actually office uses, office condominiums, office space, leasing. We're actually going to shift our whole operation down here. So a learning curve, you never stop learning, and what a dynamic thing. But the north is really what Pina and I are here to talk about, and the north has 2 residential buildings. It has a significant podium that we were looking for, academic uses. We were looking for a whole bunch of arts-based uses in this community as well. We've got a relationship, as I mentioned earlier, with Artscape, and so we spoke to Tim and his board, and they've got a very innovative program called Launchpad, which is going to be an incubator, if you will, for the arts. And of course, lots of retail, lots of non-residential spaces, animation at the pedestrian level. And so, it's taking the whole mixed-use notion on steroids again. And so lots of complications, but we knew we needed an absolute dynamite architectural team to help us realize this. And we made this strategic decision to actually split both the parcels. So the south is one architect, and the north, we were very, very happy and pleased that Pina and her team were able to assist us. So maybe what I should do is I'll hand it over, Pina, to you at that stage, and you can take us through some of the specifics and go from there.
Well, I mean, needless to say, I don't need this mic, right? Needless to say, we were delighted to be asked to be part of this venture. We were one of a team, as Neil mentioned, Daniels was long into this process before we came on board and put a team of designers and actual experts together, including Raw to design the South Block, Claude Cormier for the landscape architecture, Ken Greenberg as a consultant to the entire urban strategy, and other consultants such as Novus, who basically put all of our schemes through a rigorous performance modeling program that and informed, as you'll see in my discussion, significantly shaped. These were.
Untalked 2 slides, Pina, sorry.
Was it not? These were still Neil's slides that prompted you. You needed no prompting anyway to discuss those. So when we were approached to work on this project and to be, specifically to design the North Block, it actually is impossible to talk about the North Block without talking about the South, the extension of Sugar Beach, the inter-block connections, et cetera, et cetera. You will see that this really is a project that is a definer, I hope, of intense mixed use, or what we call in the office true mixed use. We've been involved in a lot of mixed use projects, and often mixed use is quite limited to commercial at the base and residential above. We have been involved in other projects that are more daring, but maybe none as daring as this. I say daring because when you are actually committed to a true mixed use that isn't just the slogan live, work, play, it's actually live, work, play, learn in this case, there is a whole reverberation of metrics and even mathematics that goes through the development model. So we were delighted to be part of this, and actually as architects really challenged and as many people in the audience are architects or students of architecture know that usually the most innovative designs come from limitations or come from such challenges. The slide that's up right now is a slide we put together in our first presentation to the Waterfront Toronto Design Review panel, where we started to count, literally, the number of people that would be here during the day and versus the number of people during night. A big problem that not, various pockets and neighborhoods in the city of Toronto, but maybe none like the waterfront and specifically east of Yonge Street neighborhood of the waterfront suffers from being this kind of nocturnal city or nocturnal neighborhood. It's really only through this kind of combination of programs that we could get these people here. And we like to think that it's in design and in the architecture that that really allows a kind of urban and mostly social intensification to happen. So when Peter says housing makes cities, I think that can be true for Toronto. I think it can be true perhaps only if we consider housing as an operation that is opportunistic, right? Opportunistic in a way that is a kind of excuse, maybe, to striate spaces at the ground. So we are going to show you two high-rise residential buildings here, but with an intensity at grade that allows for a kind of social infrastructure that we think is key. We happen to be obsessed with this notion in our office, and we do many projects in the city that are what we call public interiors through restaurants and bars and hotels. But this constant preoccupation of what it is like to live, and when we're talking about standards of dwelling, it's impossible to think of standards of dwelling without thinking of standards of living. And so this diagram here, just to be specific, This is the entire block. This is Queen's Quay. This is the south block, which is entirely commercial office and cultural program and retail program. This is the north block that we're talking about, and what we defined as the yard, which I'll get to in a minute. And this is just an exploded massing of the different programs that we have on this site. On the south, there is a big academic program, the office component, and I think what's somewhere here is the Artscape launch pad that happens on this side. As Neil mentioned, there was an obligation not to have any residential units on this side. On the north, then, it basically carried the load, so to speak, of residential units. There is another cultural, actually, education program here. And at the base, we have a different scale of retail and a large collecting lobby for the institution that sits above. And all in the green are the connections down to the street through the residential buildings. This idea of a kind of conviviality of these programs, but not just the programs, but basically what the waterfront and how it is currently striated with this still the vestige of its industrial use, mostly through Redpath, is a kind of richness, a texture that we really wanted to leverage and be part of and almost heighten rather than take it as a kind of confrontation. So just very quickly, there were the aspects that are shaping, I should say actually before I get into these diagrams, that coming to waterfront, but again, this side of Yonge Street, the waterfront at this side of Yonge Street already had these cultural programs that had emerged. There was the Chorus Building, the George Brown College Building, there's that think tank in information, what is it called? Do you remember, Duncan? Innovation Center that's on the boards. And so there is a kind of already these kind of magnets of cultural program that are existing in the neighborhood. And so this actually works very well to tap into that. Two things that we discovered as architects coming to this site. One is that the waterfront really does suffer to some extent with scale, with potentially a kind of middle and large scale being tackled first, as it should be, but that fine grain scale is yet to come, and it's ripe, for that scale to come and intervene. The second thing is that there is a microclimate, maybe not on a day like today where we have a bit of sun, but on a day like yesterday at the waterfront, it's quite inhospitable. As a pedestrian especially, even a cyclist, you could get blown off your bike in certain instances. And so these two aspects of this particular site, and three when we include the nodes of culture, were really what drove our scheme. And actually, these diagrams sort of explicitly show the big moves that shaped the project. So the first was the extension of Sugar Beach. Claude Cormier's intervention, does become quite literally an extension. The second, and actually quite significant for us, is the mid-block connection that was already programmed with the precinct plan. The westerly winds, which were already formidable, are already formidable, but then exacerbated by putting a 43-story tower in its path, and lastly, but not least, the proximity to Redpath and the mitigation that we needed to accommodate there. So again, these are challenges that we relish. We relish them because it provides resistance, frankly, to the work and to the design process. This was one of the first sketches that we made in order to really understand we are one side of a larger block, but that we are surrounded by Lakeshore and the Gardner to the north. and what we have coined the yard to the south, Lower Jarvis and Richardson on as the north-south adjacent streets. So the first gesture is really to identify what we call the urban order versus the creative order. An idea that was necessary to really develop a space that is a public space, but that is a textured space, textured insofar as its uses and its occupation, first of all, day and night, but also 12 months of the year, something that actually Ken Greenberg was championing for this project with the city, and was amazing. I mean, one of the questions for the symposium really hits to these kind of processes where you can get the attention of decision makers by saying, you know, if we do this as a kind of design gestures that may not fit within the official plan, we could get people here 12 months of the year, or we could have people here all day long, more people here during the day than at night. We started with this cultural podium, as we call it, that was invested with programs that actually, frankly, put so much pressure in our design view on the metrics of the residential component. So when I say that the residential component on the North Block is doing the heavy lifting, it really meant for us that direction came down from Daniels one day to say, you know that super cool shape that you made? Well, you know, so we essentially had a there's a directive to actually create these towers to be as simple, and the key word was efficient as possible. So efficient in its floor plates and the location and size of core and how it actually came down and connected with the podium, but also no jogs, no innies and outies, no pleats, no nothing. So we would come back and would say, oh yes, absolutely, we understand, and then we would go like maybe a little shift, and they'd come back and slap our hand and say, no, you didn't hear us. We want it just rectangular. And we appreciated so much that they were still letting us do this because we understood, it took us a couple of meetings, but we really understood that in order for this to really happen and for all of those people living in these towers to have an exceptional amenity, a kind of urban and ground and in their immediate proximity, their dwelling life needed to include this. And the only way that could happen is with the numbers working, and the affordability of these units were key. So the scheme really then developed using the strategy of this cultural podium with the urban order and creative order towards the yard, and the staggered towers. We sort of staggered the towers in order to create certain views and a kind of collapsing of views, frankly, and pulled the service corridor away from Lakeshore. There was always an intention that in the future, we hope in the near future, that the Gardner will come down, and then we imagined a facade that would be still robust and appropriate when that happens. So the big, I guess, gesture really happened at the urban scale or at the city scale, where we had these rectilinear volumes, we had balconies, and it was really at the level of the balcony that we provided expression. We challenged ourselves to come up with the most inexpensive way of modeling this form, this rectilinear form. And so we developed a frit pattern which unabashedly, in a two-dimensional way, tried to create a kind of optical illusion of movement, of depth, but really it's just a ceramic frit on glass balconies. This last element, which is we call the unifying element, is a big canopy. that basically was at first a result of this performance, is the result of putting the building through a performance process. The mitigation factors with Red Path really required that we dealt with not just noise but odor, and we worked hard, or the building really works hard to actually use basic technologies to respond to those mitigating factors, rather than having, we didn't need to build a wall as Peter did against Red Path. And again, with the hope of this idea of conviviality, much like the South African example, that Red Path and that sort of industrial aspect of the site continues, and this is just layered on. So the canopy actually is the greatest contributor to wind mitigation, and the tests included, as a pedestrian, what are the degrees of comfort? There are many kind of actual rankings that they give in different spots of the site, and we were intent on providing the maximum comfort as a pedestrian in order for the space to be used, even on days like today. So the strategy was to actually create, as I said, the ceramic frit. The westerly tower actually created a ripple. The easterly tower was reverberation. We say that it's, ripple like water, but really in the office we were so battling and wrestling with this issue of sound mitigation, the STC ratings, et cetera, that for us it's noise, waves, and reverberations, not water. And the frit, so the studies of frit were exhaustive, and the layering, and again, keeping in mind the price point, we developed a whole strategy of only 5 patterns, but in their recombination got a kind of depth and complexity. And similarly with the reverberation side, which is the east tower, these were not expressed as glass balconies, but patterned perforated metal balconies, which are actually the only thing cheaper than the glass balconies, and developed a whole sort of, as the unit layouts developed, we developed this with gaps in the balconies, and essentially ended up with 3 very basic types of balconies. The balcony is maybe the first, I say preoccupation politely, but really a kind of obsession in the domestic project for us, and how it participates or extends that domestic unit. These are the 3 types ultimately that inform this project: the ceramic fritted bypass balcony, the perforated metal panel bypass balcony, and then the clear glass panel, which is the most basic we could have. The clear glass balcony happens on the inside where the view is most controlled. So in this idea of the balcony, just very quickly, some other projects that we've been involved in that challenge us to really reconsider what the balcony gives and how it performs. This is our contribution to the Regent Park Revitalization Project, where partway through the process, this building was full of balconies. The directive came down from TCHC and Daniels that we were to try to eliminate the balconies, and it actually developed a strategy that allowed a pushing out of living room spaces. We still maintained a very critical 40 to 60 vision glass to solid ratio that is critical for the energy performance of this building and all TCHC buildings, and embraced the solidity. In another example, a similar challenge, although we could have balconies, there were some serious structural restraints. This is a repurposed brutalist commercial building from the 1970s that we converted into a residential building and actually carved out balconies in between. We love the heroic concrete pilasters. but there is a kind of opportunity to have what we call the loggia type balcony in this structure. There was no easy way to project balconies. So again, this was a limitation that we embraced and developed extra deep strategies there. Another project actually which very similar to this project City of the Arts. This is at 99 Sudbury. It's at the railway line here. And there is actually an award-winning initiative by the City of Toronto for the rail path, the West End rail path. But it actually was planned to end at our building, to end at this site here. And we developed this robust and layered podium complete with a crash wall that actually goes all the way along, and raised the rail path actually 4.5 meters. And it's a similar, what we call a kind of opportunistic strategy to have, the limitations. This had actually more serious noise limitations from that rail line, and you see here that our first gesture is to actually recess the balconies and have achieve pretty significant STC ratings, but at the same time, as you trickle down through that building, there is this layered base that helps to do that. And this is a view of the site. There's the crash wall and the raised path. Lastly, a different condominium building. We call these Thing 1 and Thing 2. But it's a completely different kind of idea of the balcony, but consistent with the kind of tectonic research that goes into the piece itself. So obviously this is a highly formal strategy where the ribbon-like effect of the balcony is critical. And so that is maintained. However, we're actually overlapping. A perforated metal comes up 2/3 of the way, and clear glass comes up the last third. The idea is that it really is the object in the field. The views are all 360, and so if you are sitting inside your unit, you still see through above the perforated metal, but really the perforated metal is amazing for keeping all of the garbage and tchotchkes out of view, and as well giving a sense of containment, especially when you go up. So back to City of the Arts, it really is this ground plane. The yard, as Ralph Giannone, my partner and husband, coined the phrase. It's not a courtyard, we kept saying, but really it is a yard, really borrowing from the industrial version for its productivity, but not just that kind of productivity, but really a cultural, educational productivity given the programs that surround it. So the yard is really an experiment of what the City of Toronto refers to as POPs, which is privately owned public space. And we love POPs. And this is a poster child, we hope, for POPs. Because when there is a privately owned public space, it makes so many things easier, like having events in this space does not require certain kind of licensing, doesn't require any kind of procedure to do that. It's really the interested parties that surround and own that place that could actually control those aspects, and it really helps with design elements as well. Like the flushness of paving, etc. So the yard itself, what we see here is, this is the large canopy for that wind mitigation, and this is an amenity that happens to serve only the condominiums that's raised up. That's the yard below. This is the south building, and this is the connection to the waterfront precinct plan through that mid-block. So a lot of thought, going into the yard, and a lot of discussions about really what is it. It's not wide enough to be a courtyard. It's not meant to be sun-drenched. It really is meant to be a yard. And we looked at various examples, mostly in the UK and actually in Germany. These are both Stone Road from London, and the sort of rigorous development of the innies and outies in terms of what happens to that section. Claude Cormier actually has a great idea of putting catenary lights across. The advantage of the yard is that it is relatively narrow, and these catenary lights actually could span and be hung between those buildings. So at night, it literally creates a kind of ceiling to the space. This is a view of actually the south side being much smaller retail offerings. On the north side, there is the large lobby for the education sort of institutional component above, and then larger retail spaces that could be a gallery, a restaurant, things like that. This is just another view. And from the north, the lakeshore side, there is actually a interesting exercise in that we wanted to at least approach the new City of Toronto standards for accommodating bicycle storage. We're very proud to say that there's 899 bicycles that can be stored here. This is the plan of the bicycle storage and the ramp that takes you up. This is the lakeshore facade that we're seeing here and the gardener that passes through, and which in itself has an extraordinary, this is a view of Sugar Beach North, adjacent that, and that's just a final view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction of this project. Pina, maybe it was intentional or unintentional, but there was quite an emphasis on the cheapness of the towers.
I know, I'm hurting here, Pina.
Did I ever use the word cheap? Not cheap.
No, the kind of
Inexpensive.
You were projecting, hon.
everything had to be cheap. So, how's that for you, Neil, to hear this, that you're the one saying should be less?
So I'm in all jest. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, there was a hard-fought negotiation with Redpath and Waterfront Toronto and the City of Toronto. There were very definite reduced footprints of the residential component given, so that was an economic challenge that we had to face. In terms of the embedded art uses, part of our business formula is to be able to approach them with below-market component, and so that has to be subsidized from somewhere. Having said that, never once do we want to sacrifice buildings that we are collectively creating. We always want to be able to come and be very proud and walk through and constantly learn. We've had our challenges with some of the glass issues, like a lot of other builders as well. And so, all these things combined with wanting to say we can go and create, really eloquent podium expression and tower buildings on top of these podiums that we don't think necessarily needs to have a treatment that has been characterized by lots of other buildings. And so it was a challenge. It was a challenge to Pina and to her team. I wouldn't characterize it as cheap.
No.
It's alternate forms that can still accomplish the kind of building. I should also preface this by saying these buildings are being marketed north of $700 a foot, and so that is certainly not a price accessible for a lot of people. I mean, we're getting a premium clearly because of all the different components that are going on here. Mm-hmm. So it's like anything else. The devil will be in the details and the execution, and I have every confidence in our team and in Pina's team that we're going to be very proud with what we're going to collectively create here.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, if I gave that impression of cheapness, I mean, cheap is really, it doesn't mean the same as efficient or lean. But it is more inexpensive than what we were proposing, significantly more than actually what we were proposing. And I have to say, I admit that that really does come from a kind of automatic nature. As architects, we sort of at the get-go, we sort of start to develop a scheme and a strategy that is moving, is transforming of that space, and we usually revert to gestures, right? The first broad stroke on the site is the big move, and we relished that challenge and actually understood it and therefore appreciated it even more when we understood how it really participated in this larger realm. And when we talk in a symposium like this about real estate and the valuation that happens through design and through architecture, I would say that this is one of them. You can actually develop something that is efficient and lean and be very resourceful materially, but mostly in the details. It's not even the materials. Sometimes, we learn that sometimes even the most inexpensive materials, inexpensive off the shelf, become incredibly labor intensive. Often the way, as architects, we imagine them as if we're sewing a dress, and so then just to hang it like that, just to trim it like that, gets very expensive very quickly. So by no stretch of the imagination is this, would I refer to this as cheap, right?
Okay. Yeah. There's a big emphasis on mixed use, and I think we've been talking about mixed use already. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on what's the right scale according to you? Do you need to have it in one single building, or is it necessary to have it this condensed, or could it be, let's say, 4 blocks away as well? So until which moment do you still feel this as a kind of diverse or vibrant neighborhood? Does it need to be in one building?
It doesn't need to be in one building, but there are things that do need to be in one building.
Like what?
And like the opportunity, it really doesn't matter like what, but there are enough things that you need to pass through in order to get to your home. And the reason for that is that there is ultimately a different social exchange that happens when you are forced to actually pass through those kinds of programs. Otherwise, going to your home, especially if it's in a high-rise, and you're passing through the sidewalk to the lobby, to the unit, and there isn't that kind of contagious energy and I guess layering of people and uses, then it really is about proximity, and it's about not being able to bypass that whole occupation of that site. So I mean, the whole block is important. That's why it's so important to present the whole block, because the south building participates mostly, I would say, just in terms of sheer square footage and number of people, to this mixed-use model, to the intensification of mixed-use model, and it's really the yard, that space, Sugar Beach North, that actually scaffolds that activity, and then it's continued through the building. There are spaces inside the building, the amenities of the building itself, that again put less pressure on the sizes of units, because people start to have their dinner parties in a collective space rather than in their unit, et cetera. Yeah.
I mean, I guess, Hans, when you've posed the question, it just had me thinking. I mean, it's very tough because we're under construction right now, and it's very difficult to visualize and to put sizes to these things. But just relatively speaking, we have a 2.8 acre site with a very ambitious program. TIFF Bell Lightbox was realized on about an acre of land, and TIFF is about just shy of 200, 175, 180,000 square foot podium, and about 400 plus or minus residential units. I mean, I've been to that building, like I hope a lot of other people have been, countless times. It feels really, really good. It feels like it contributes to the city. It draws people in. It has a whole host of activities that are happening that contribute to city life. It also has, clearly the residential component. It's very clear in my mind, and we proved the theory that purchasers, homeowners care about what's going on in the podium of that building. The selling proposition at TIFF was enhanced because of that activity, the same way in which we are enhancing the residential offering by what we're doing here. And so conceptually, this is actually less dense than what we created at TIFF Bell Lightbox.
But isn't that...
And I feel really good about what that building does. So I'm feeling very good about the scale and the proportion and the different uses. And it's, in terms of the different components Pina's talked about, in terms of the office and really the true ability for people to then, travel down the elevator because, as has been talked about in earlier discussions, the nature and use of homes has changed. It continues to evolve. A lot of people are using them for, their office component. I mean, think of, so Artscape Launchpad is an incubator for young artists. Chances are they're going to do their craft, but the rest of their business operation is going to be out of their home. And for them to be able to go and vertically be able to tap into different spaces and be able to go and realize that, I think is magical. I think is the essence of, the contribution mixed use is going to make. We think about it on a pure residential basis. I mean, part of the reason smaller units are successful, apart from price point, is that there's often an ability for people to then go and have dinner parties and private gatherings in the amenity spaces. They don't have to have those dedicated spaces. They don't want to pay for them anymore. And so, that clearly is sort of another dynamic.
But then in this comparison with TIFF, is there a kind of disadvantage given this less central location? Because TIFF is in the middle of everything. Would it be harder, do you think, to activate the ground floor here?
I think the more interesting question is going to be about the year-round aspect, which is to say that we think of waterfront communities in a very sort of sunny way that, we've all been down to ideally Sugar Beach, where it's just happening in the summertime. I mean, I'm still yet to be able to get a reservation at Against the Grain, looking on the water in the summertime. Tough place to get into. So they become magnets. I think our challenge as city builders is to activate these spaces in the non-sunny times, like in the shoulder seasons, in the winter time. And I think that, more so now, this building will give a reason for people to want to be down here, a whole host of reasons to want to be down here. And I think it will positively contribute to that fabric. I'm not concerned about the locational characteristics at all. A bunch of us will get together. We will try and make rapid transit happen. Eventually. I will say the bus network is actually not bad, and on those sunny days, the walk from Union is really quite pleasurable. I mean, it's the same thing that I walk often from our Regent Park Management office, which is roughly about a 15-minute walk to our office, and it's a nice sort of relief, and it's about the same distance, to walk from Union Station. So I'm not overly concerned about the locational. In fact, I think it's a tremendous opportunity, to be able to have such a dynamic gateway location come alive with all these different uses. I mean, and as Pina said, an important player in all of this was Ken Greenberg. I mean, Ken was a very, of good assistance to our team and being able to, talk about these different spaces, because it will be in the details. It will be in the execution of the retail. We want the yard to be a little messy. It's not meant to be the fussy retail. Go and have a different experience there.
In that regard, it's important to say that Ken, at a certain point in the process, actually had us arguing about should the yard be covered, right? There was this whole time where we, did a lot of research and presented a case against it, but it was a possibility, right? That there was, and when the first reports came back from Novus, everyone kind of went, oh my God, is this a kind of dream that we're thinking that this really can be an outdoor, very comfortable experience most of the year for a pedestrian, and I think that it was just what that commitment on everybody's part really is what drove it. I think that there's so much faith in this site and in this place and this part of the city that Daniels is actually moving their offices down there. So,
Richard, you want to say something?
Yeah, I want wanted to ask a question. And first of all, to point out, there's some very interesting things about this last image around the way you presented the project, about the kind of normative nature of the tower and the animation of the base. That the base, I guess, by design, is it the same height as the Gardner?
A little higher,
As a kind
yes.
of green
A little higher, yeah.
treatment, but I also wanted to ask you to sort of elaborate a little bit on what you stated in your talk. You said your office and your work, you've done a lot of, you talked about POPs, publicly owned private space, but the fact is you're somewhat unique, I think, among you and Ralph, among the architects that are now doing this kind of work, that you've worked at radically different scales, right? Your office has been extremely successful in creating these restaurants and kind of retail environments that are extremely lively in the emerging city, which are the spaces that are responding to all of this density that is coming into the city. So you're creating that kind of informal commercial public space. And at the same time, you slowly now gotten into this other side of the equation. In between, you do things like the shops at Don Mills, which are a way to bring public life to a formerly purely residential, almost pure, well, a former mall, but otherwise a residential area. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about how you take that experience in designing these, in designing restaurants, which has a certain art to it, about animating public life, and how you're amplifying that, in a sense, in a project like this, to animate the entire base of the project.
Well, thanks for asking the question. There is no, question that we are really obsessed with the social program in every project that we do. And for us, there is no difference between the social program and the city, and city making and city building, because it's an infrastructure just like anything else. Just like we need transit and water to get everywhere on the grid, we need a social infrastructure. And we basically approach it. It doesn't matter if we're designing an interior, even a pure interior project, a piece of furniture, a lighting fixture, an exterior furniture piece, or a 43, or even a redevelopment. We do a lot of urban redevelopments, but it really does come back to that experience as an individual versus a collective. And we often do a series of what we call scenario diagrams that we challenge each other to say, well, how does a person who is coming here to work and doesn't care about that, what is that experience? And we often use the word manipulation, but not in a negative way, like where these, but in a positive way. We enjoy manipulating the mundane experience of going to the store and buying a carton of milk, that forces these kind of unexpected exchanges, mostly with people or with views or with smells of certain spaces. So in a project like this, even if we're starting with what we call the fat marker in the office, when, I remember when I was a student, actually specifically a student of Bruce Kubara's, he would come and have his beautiful little fountain pen, and I would say, could you use this fine pen? Because it was just these big strokes, and I said, could you use the fine pen? So when you're at the big marker stage, the fat marker stage, we have about 4 sizes. That's really the big move stage, and it's no different. We still pull out the fat marker when we're designing a tiny little space. And it's really more about what are the magnetic centers, and layered on a kind of urban order. So the urban order versus creative order diagram is at a city block scale, but that same diagram, could be a very small space.
Thank you very much. I invited the other panelists, Meg, Julian, David, Peter. What?
Oh.
Yeah. Take a break. Okay, we take a 5 minutes break. Thank you very much. Thank you.